All right, dear guys, let's get this started then, right?
Go for it.
Sounds like a good idea.
Because really, what could go wrong once you press record, right?
Exactly. What could go wrong? It's all going to be very perfect.
Welcome to this Crazy People podcast, Beau. I'm very happy to have you on. Before we start with anything, yes, this is Beau Billington, and as a guest in our podcast today, you know my partner in crime, Ross Brummer, and
Hola.
I'm the unfortunate Maurice Hoffman. So, Beau, as I said, we've been knowing each other for a couple of years, and I've really been looking forward for us to have this chat.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to be here. In regards to kind of who I am, so name's Beau Billington. Started a company called The Free Agent almost 6 years ago. It'll be 6 years, April of 2023. Always planned on being an entrepreneur, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a little while. But finally found my way into entrepreneurship around 37, which is old by some standards out there. But in regards to kind of what The Free Agent does, so we provide executive headhunting services as well as management consulting to high growth tech companies. So think Series A, Series B, Series C. Common theme with a lot of those organizations is leadership or the lack thereof. And bottom line, the same folks that got them to 10 or 20 million, oftentimes not the same to get them from 20 to 40 million. And so we come into these organizations and help them build out their leadership teams to kind of continue to accelerate results. So that's it. That's a 30-second sales pitch for you real quick.
Fantastic. First of all, I'm happy that you survived my consulting. And second, in terms of late starter, a little tidbit, I did a research for our joint former employer, and turns out globally, average age for an SMB founder is 40. So you entered the game a bit earlier than.
Hey, good for me, I guess, but I feel like of course, the older you get, the more inherent risk you have. And so I would have figured that number would have been closer to 32, 35. I guess it depends on the industry, but that's an interesting stat. And you made me feel better about myself, Maurice. Already adding value. Look at that.
Look at that. That's what I'm here for. But yeah, tell us a bit about how did you get started?
Yeah, so I'd always planned on being an entrepreneur. Didn't know when, how, where, or what, to be honest with you. And just to kind of give you the quick and dirty, I just had my first child, and I was in Toronto. This is about 5 days before Christmas, and I was in Toronto because somebody told me I needed to be in Toronto. It looked like I was going to get snowed in and miss my first Christmas with my newborn child. And so I was sitting downstairs at a restaurant. ESPN came on, and they're talking about so-and-so was a free agent. And honestly, that was a light bulb moment to me where I thought, wow, these people are free agents, and they can essentially kind of, create their own destiny and play for whomever they want to play with in theory. Why can't that translate over into the business world? And so I started talking about it. And it took me about 3 years before I really kind of crystallized an idea and had the courage to jump out of corporate America. I feel like I got my business to about 80% of the way that I could, kind of behind the cover of night and while working in a corporate America, and realized I would never get it further. I would probably never drive any revenue until I actually kind of jumped out and burned the boat, so to speak. So that was interesting. And prior to doing so, I'd worked for software and services companies, mainly international firms, a lot of international travel, a lot of time zones, a lot of busyness. And candidly, I came to an inflection point. I think it was actually when Maurice and I worked together that corporate America was not the place for me, and that I'd rather be outside on my own, kind of on my own terms.
Okay, so tell me about some of the companies. You don't have to name names, please, but what did you do in those companies? Because what I'm curious about is how did you get from having these different roles, and I know you had a sales role in the company that we were in together, how you came from those several roles and what inspired you to eventually come to the point where you're at right now with your company?
Yeah, so I targeted the telecom space a lot, and typically calling on Fortune 50 organizations. So selling one company, we sold security hardware and software. Of course, when we worked together, we sold a collaboration suite, and then the job after that, we actually sold professional services into the Fortune 50. No travel, which is part of the catalyst of me jumping out, to be honest with you. But basically, our job was to set up kind of a professional services engagement. So talk to a CIO and look out 1, 3, 5 years in the future, create a roadmap, and then ultimately put together a service that could kind of help them accomplish that goal. That's hanging out there. And so a couple of that experience specifically with kind of the aha moment, when in Toronto about the free agent. That's kind of how I thought of the concept, the company, the free agent. And so I own the URL, thefreeagent.com. But it was really kind of the combination of those two worlds, seeing professional services, seeing, a tremendous amount of inefficiencies that exist, working on very, very, very large businesses and wondering how smaller businesses, how they survive without the same access to talent that these large businesses have. And then again, coupling that world with wanting to be independent, wanting to be my own free agent, wanting to be kind of a hired gun, if you will, from a sales perspective. And that was really the start of the company, the free agent. And ultimately kind of my charter, my task, what I was looking to accomplish was to provide small, medium-sized businesses with access to, Fortune 500 talent. That was really kind of the goal. And it started with kind of a spark. And
so you talked about ups and downs. So tell me some of the struggles, especially at the beginning, because we're not your house, your boat, your big luxurious car type podcast, but more interested in all the success that some people are having. They didn't fall from sky and got there immediately, right? It was a struggle to get there, and they had to work hard. And so that's what we want to look at.
Yeah, well, the struggle is real. Anybody that's what's I've got a podcast as well called Find That Next Gear, and it's kind of a quasi similar premise where we try to look under the covers and see what is it really like to be an entrepreneur. So I get it. I love this topic because if you just paid attention to the media and all the stories on Instagram and everything that's out there, you'd think that you can start $1 billion business, in your garage and exit in 6 months. And that's, maybe that happens from time to time, but not often. And, what's true about it is that it is tough. It's super lonely. When I jumped out of corporate America, I worked on a business plan. I spent a lot of time. In fact, Maurice, you helped me with the business plan. And I had all these figures and calculations and forecasts. And candidly, I should have just thrown it out the window because it was worthless. Right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And until you're out in the market and you're testing kind of your thesis, it's all assumptions. And so a tough part for me was getting out to the marketplace and realizing that the direction I thought initially that my business should go was maybe not the right direction. And, I thought within, 3 months or so, I was probably going to be able to start driving revenue. And that was really around 6 to 7 months before I actually got my first paycheck. And so I'm sitting here and I just, I had my second kid. We just built our house, had a relatively good paying job. The money trap was real. And then of course I try to blow up my life by telling my wife I'm jumping out of corporate America, and then I don't even get a paycheck for 6 months. So that's part of the struggle. And of course we prepared for that financially. I had money put away that helped with the float. And of course I promised my wife no hidden lifestyle, which was a bad mistake. But, that was probably one of the biggest challenges was getting out and realizing that the initial direction was maybe not the right direction. I needed to tweak it, and that it was going to be a hell of a lot harder to start driving revenue and replace my income than I initially thought it was.
Okay, so there's one interesting bit. I think that is something that a lot of people that are not as experienced or not quite as forward thinking is the planning ahead for not making any revenue. So where did that come from? Is that just common sense, you would think, or is that based on a story that you heard somewhere? And
I think a combination of events. I think it's really easy, especially in entrepreneurship, to get super optimistic. You've got this idea, it has to work, right? Why would you not buy this, right? Yeah. And it's really not that simple. When I jumped out of corporate America, I didn't have a book of business. like most of my clients were in Europe, were in San Francisco, Toronto, all those places which were not going to buy services from me. And I had to start locally in Atlanta and build my book of business kind of organically. And that was tough. And so, that was one driver from the monetary piece, is I did realize there was going to be a ramp, but it was much more substantial than I thought. But also too, I am a family man. I often used to joke and say, barometer for success for me is if I'm still married in 5 years. But that was also part of the driver too, though, honestly, but that was part of the driver of making sure there's enough cash reserves, and making sure that I planned effectively, to float and spend the time necessary to actually start the business. Now, that being said, there is a counter thought to that if I had less cash reserves, then I probably could have short-circuited the time necessary, because I would have had to have, right? That's probably a topic for another day. But no, it was just kind of ensuring that I was, putting my best foot forward, making sure my family was taken care of first. And that I was being smart, and not completely risky, because again, it's easy to really kind of buy into your concept, your idea. And if you're going for it, I mean, it's easy to have blinders on.
Got it. Absolutely. Hey, Russ, what do you think? Do we take this show on the road and quit our day jobs, or do we wait another couple of months to do this? So,
Well, back in the last century, literally it was the end of the last century. I did a very similar thing at 31, and had a 6-month-old at home, and said, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to be able to go and replace all my corporate America, income and healthcare and all the other things that you get that corporate America gives you. And it was like, oh yeah, it's gonna, sure. I was Beau's super positive entrepreneur. Yeah, like next week I'm gonna be. Look, I've done a couple of things on the side, like on weekends. It'll be great. It'll be fun. Yeah. So I'm with you there, Beau.
No, honestly, some of the loneliest times, because it's like, I was very, very honest with my wife where things stood, because that was a non-negotiable for me. But it can be quite lonely, and then you're always questioning, like, am I failing? Am I doing something wrong? Am I insufficient? Am I a bad entrepreneur? So I'd say the first, and that's not just the first 6 months. I mean, at least for me, it was the first year and a half, maybe up to 2 years, where you're like, it's very unstable ground. I mean, hell, even almost 6 years in, it's still kind of a quasi house of cards. I've got enough customers and enough revenue and things where it's I'm not worried. Things have changed. I have different worries. But the first, year and a half, it's you feel like you're on very unstable, no stable footing.
Yeah, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start off, especially if they come out of a company who had a name, they underestimate the power of a company that has a name, and the stability that gives you, right? And the leg up that it gives you. You're like, hey, I'm working out of my garage, right? And can you?
I'm a guy in a van down by the river, and it's a great point though. Brand equity. I had zero brand equity. I had people who kind of knew me, but nobody knew the free agent was. They'd never heard of it. They hadn't gotten any cold emails from me, anything. Yep. And that is very difficult. You didn't really have any clients either, right? I mean, I started from zero. And so I had to kind of convince my first client, and then my second and third and fourth, and so on and so forth. But that is the toughest thing, is that I'd like to eventually exit this business, if possible. I don't know if I have it in me, unless I was independently wealthy, to start a business from scratch again, because it is, until you walk a mile, it's hard to understand how tough it is. You got to be scrappy. And we can talk about some characteristics here in a little bit, but without brand equity, it's tough. It's tough. It's quite tough.
Yeah. I talked to a guy this morning who said, when I started this business, I only had $40 million. And I'm like, oh, my heart bleeds for you, brother. I feel bad for you. Yeah. But Beau, tell us a little bit. but tell us a little bit about what that second customer looks like, right? You're chasing around and you're sort of pivoting to find the first one. In the second one, do you go, that first one was really awful, I got to go do somewhere else, or you double down on the first guy? What does 1 customer to 2 customer to 3 customer look like for you?
So that's a great question. I think the entire time you're iterating and figuring out what you did well, what you didn't do well, where you could have improved. But it's a process, it's a journey. I mean, and a lot of it's kind of an individual journey and figuring this whole thing out. And so my first customer has since been fired. I think I fired them about a year in. So we created a relationship, got paid. That relationship lasted a year. So about a year and a half in before they got fired. And what's great though is I did have a logo with them, and I was able to kind of replicate the sales process and bring that to another client and kind of replicate my process and try a few things out. So it served its purpose, but it was just kind of, and since I've created a matrix where I've got A, B, C, D clients, and they were like an E or an F, you know what I mean? Which says a lot. But it helped me refine my process, and it helped me also to kind of determine what's an A customer, what's a B customer, what's a C customer, et cetera. And so I used kind of that success and replicated it. And, each time throughout the 5-6 years, I've tried to kind of go up a little bit further, push my price point, push the types of organizations that we're working with, et cetera. And so again, it's kind of an iterative process where you start at one point and maybe you get lucky. Like my second customer or third customer, I kind of got super lucky with them, and they're still clients to this day. And so it really just depends. But I think landing your first client is essential. Figuring out what you did well, what you did wrong, fixing what you did wrong, iterating, and kind of repeating the process as you go along is really what I found the best way to succeed, and really kind of hone in on your story in your sales process. But you've got to reflect on what's good, what's bad, and be able to pick your head up when a client is not good, because they will suck the ever living life out of you. And there's a significant opportunity cost associated with bad clients, because in my experience, bad clients give me 20% of the revenue, but I spend 80% of my time with them.
Yeah.
And that's not a good situation. And so being mindful of that, I feel, is critical, because I should have fired them earlier and spent more time prospecting. So it's an easy trap. I found myself in that trap. Or maybe I'm all alone, and I'm an anomaly.
Very common trap, very common landmine to step on.
Yeah, I think so too. So what I hear from that is, though, your path towards success was a lot of reflection, right? A lot of analyzing your situation, not just basing on, I know how this works, right? It's so tell me about, how did you go about this? Because it cannot be easy to constantly self-doubt yourself, right? Because it also is not good for your confidence, right? In some ways.
Oh, no.
If you have a team around you, it's easier because you keep each other accountable. So how does that work for yourself, when you yourself and you is really trying to getting this done?
No, that's a great point. And confidence, I think, is critical here, all the way around, especially in entrepreneurship. But it's a combination of things. I mean, self-reflection is important, especially in the early days. I try to spend a lot of time just like journaling, writing, reading. I mean, I've got books on books right behind my computer right here. And so spend a tremendous amount of time reading. I've actually gotten away from that, which is something I'm trying to change next year. But reading was very, very helpful, and kind of helped inspire me, reinvigorate me, and help me kind of over some stumps and some pitfalls. And so that was important. The self-reflection is important, for sure. And one thing that I've just tried to remind myself is that what I found, and kind of in my podcast, but also my own experience, is that perseverance, I think, is like the underlying theme across all entrepreneurs, especially those that kind of struggle when they start their company. And so I just kind of continue to remind myself that, like, hey, I jumped out of corporate America. Like, your ego is attached to this. Like you can't go back to corporate America. It's not going to happen. And you just got to get up every day and fight. And that's what I did. And it's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. I think if it was, then everybody would start a company. But I just kept continuously reminding myself that this is part of the process, and you gotta, it's a Navy SEALs saying, but you gotta learn to embrace the suck. And that's kind of what I did. It was just kind of put yourself in the mindset that this is going to be super painful, and one day this part's not going to be as painful, but there's going to be other crap that I'm worried about that's going to be just as painful within that time frame.
Yeah. So how did your everyday look like? Like, what is it that you tackle, especially as a new entrepreneur? right? Because you don't know what to do. There's like 1,000 things that you're supposed to do at the same time, if at all possible. But you have to focus, set priorities. What did you do?
So I've done a million different things, Maurice, and I've done a million things that haven't worked, and maybe one or two that have. But I'm good in kind of creating lists and trying to kind of dissect my day, dissect my week. Where am I? Basically, what am I doing that's moving the cursor? What am I doing that's maybe busy work or just making me feel like I'm working? And so I think that's critical is really kind of dissecting that and figuring out which side of the axis you're on. So that's important. Research was also critical to what I did because this was a new field for me. I really jumped out and didn't know what I was doing, which has also been, I think that's my superpower, because I come at the industry from a different perspective, but it also is kind of a weakness. And I think a reason that it took so long to kind of ramp up was because I was literally learning. And so a lot of that was a lot of time was spent researching companies, researching best practices, researching competitors, business models, working on the website. But also too, then trying to figure out how to, they throw this term around, fail fast. But it's more so I feel like get through tasks that don't maybe drive, move the needle, get through them quickly. That's not necessarily a zero-sum game where you fail or succeed, but like just not get crap knocked out quicker. You don't need to spend 10 months on a trademark as an example. So that's what I did, was just, again, make sure that I was efficient with my time and that the work that I was working on was high value. And a lot of it at the very beginning was customer focused prospecting, heavy business development, just trying to get the brand and the name out there. And like I said, some things worked well and others, didn't. And those, the ones that didn't work well, I tried to figure it out quickly and move on.
And something that you said, I think you glossed over it a little bit, right? So you not only started a new business from scratch, right, with nothing established prior to really starting the business, but you also did it in a field that you are not natively from, right? Yeah. So that's not the most common way of doing things. So yeah. What kind? How? I mean, how did you do that? How did you prepare for that? I mean, that is because normally it's like, you come from marketing and you do marketing stuff in the aftermath, yeah. Right? Or you're an engineer and you do engineering stuff. But it's not like you are a salesperson in a SaaS business and then you essentially look to do recruiting, consulting, and these kind of things, right? It's a little bit foreign.
Yeah, well, I had a little baseline of information where I did work for a sheer professional services company for almost 2 years. And so I did have some insight into kind of the consulting side of the house. And so that did help. But, executive headhunting and a lot of the other work that we actually do as well was something that I had to kind of learn on my own and learn as I was going. But also too, there's a period of about 2 years before I jumped out of corporate America that I spent researching, writing, creating business plans. And so it wasn't like, I jumped out and flipped the switch, like, let's go. I jumped out and felt like I had a relatively good understanding as of the industry. Of course, you jump out and you're like, well, crap, I just scratched the surface, right? But don't tell my wife that. But, I was pretty meticulous. It was planned out. And I definitely did do my due diligence on the opportunity, on, target client, target customer. Of course, that takes years to iterate, but there was some kind of, framework of how I should operate, which then I just needed to take that framework and then enhance it.
That totally makes sense. So along the way, you talk to a lot of people that have good or bad tips for you. What were the 3 best tips that you ever got from anyone? And what were the 3 worst ones?
I mean, that's how much time do you have, Maurice? Because I've gotten a lot of bad advice. I've gotten a lot of good advice, and it's tough to really kind of distill that down to 3 points on either side of the house. I will kind of change that a little bit, and I will say that when I first jumped out of corporate America, I was getting a lot of advice from people that hadn't walked a mile in my shoes. So I was talking to a lot of people that were in corporate America, they're executives, and I was like, hey, how about this business model? Does this make sense? Or what about doing this and doing that? And I was getting advice from people, and candidly, they didn't understand how a small business operates. They didn't understand the budget in which I was working with. They also didn't understand, what would resonate to my buyer, which was going to be a Series A, Series B, Series C company versus somebody at a 500 company. And so, I took a lot of advice. I implemented a lot of advice. And then I realized that while I still listen to advice from people that are in corporate America, the best advice that I did receive was from other entrepreneurs and, people who have actually jumped out. They've taken risk, tried to start a company. They've walked a mile in my shoes. And a lot of the advice that I took and implement was around what not to do. And that comes to, failing fast, I think is really, really critical.
Yeah.
So like just get stuff done. And if it's not perfect, that's fine. If it fails, be ready to move on and pivot. So that was some real sage advice. I guess, another example would be not spending time on items that don't move the cursor in a big way. So low value items, don't spend time on low value items. I mean, granted, you've got to spend time across your business, but there's also bigger levers that you can pull. And those are the areas in which I feel like most entrepreneurs should spend their time. So those are just a kind of a couple of examples, but there's been a lot of bad advice that I've followed. I'm generally pretty good though of taking an inventory of all the advice that I get, and then kind of spending some time thinking through that and then making a decision and generally sticking behind that decision.
That's fantastic.
I know I gave you a watered down answer, but
No,
it's hard to extract just, a couple examples that were really bad or really good.
yeah, I obviously had hoped for one really good one and one really bad one, but it's totally fine because I think at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? There's a lot of people that try to give you tips or suggestions or whatever, because everybody has an opinion, right? I know there's another saying with opinions and other people's parts, but I'm not going there. Everybody has an opinion, especially those that are in second row, that are sitting comfortably in the back of the car while you are driving, right? And they're clever about this as long as they're sitting in the back, right? So.
No, agreed. I mean, I guess just to kind of circle back to this, I will say that finding a mentor was some good advice that I've received. As well as like kind of finding a tribe, people that, have kind of the same mindset around business. That's really been important to me and something that I've kind of implemented within the last year or so. That's been helpful.
All right. Let's go to your business as is right now. So what is it that you do and how do you, in the role that you look at these companies that want to do and want to grow, right? And want to shift to the next gear, to kind of paraphrase the title of your podcast. What do you see happening there with those companies? What are the decisions that you see that those companies have to make in order to get there?
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer. And, as I kind of mentioned at the outset of the discussion, a lot of times with these high growth organizations, the same leaders that got them, say, 20 or 40 million are not the same to get them 40 or 80. And so a lot of the challenges that pop up are around, personnel, honestly, cash flow management. And so that's really kind of the role that we play, is that we sit down with these leaders and, really kind of help them build out their leadership teams and find those individuals that need to be on the bus and maybe help make some decisions on who needs to be off the bus, but ultimately optimizing kind of, their lieutenants across a couple of different silos. And so that's the reason why, when I first started my business, it was all around interim executive support, right? So just think like a consultant, a fractional executive consultant or an interim consultant. And about 3 years ago, we included executive headhunting as well into kind of our product offering. And the reason we did that is because, small organizations, small businesses, and I'm talking, 20, 30 million to 120 million, but, their needs are fluid. So, they may need a full-time chief sales officer, but maybe they need an interim chief financial officer because they're sub 15 million. Right. And so that's kind of why we straddle both sides of the house. And that's also too why we work at a couple of different silos, from sales, marketing, technology, product ops, as well as finance and accounting most recently. So our goal is kind of be that one throat to choke and really be able to partner with these organizations and get deep enough, candidly, where, if we were to meet somebody on the street, we could aptly represent their brand, just like anybody else could within the organization.
So do you just, in air quotes, just have them with the staff, or do you really go in and identify the staffing needs that they may have?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Do you just provide them with staffing and say they come to you, kind of qualify their needs, and then you provide the staffing with them, or do you go into their businesses and say, hey, listen, guys, I know you asked me for a sales guy, but right now, from the perspective that what I see it is that you need a CFO, right? Because you need to freshen up your financials first before anything else.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We're typically the latter, right? Where it's much more consultative. We're sitting down with the owners. I typically try not to work with organizations where I'm not meeting with the CEO, the president, or a division head. So we're sitting down with these individuals, having conversations with them, and it's happened countless times where, it's just a quick example. I've got a customer that's about 20 million, and they kept running through salespeople over and over and over. And so they called me like, hey, I need a new salesperson. I think I actually need a chief revenue officer because these salespeople are horrible and I keep having to fire them. And I was like, well, maybe something else with the engine needs to be optimized, right? Versus saying broken, it needs to be optimized. And so, having that conversation, we kind of fleshed out that maybe it was too early for a chief revenue officer, because they hadn't even kind of, determined the actual go-to-market strategy. And so we actually brought in an interim chief revenue officer for this organization that worked, 2 days a week for about a year and helped them kind of productize their solution set, work on their go-to-market strategy, hire a couple salespeople, like really create and optimize the engine. And now he's off, he's moved into an advisor capacity, and we're actually doing a search for their sales leader because now it makes sense. And so, yes, we absolutely sit down with companies and have conversations with them and help them kind of reflect and discover what's really needed. And that's what I enjoy most about my job.
That's an interesting story, because a lot of times when I speak to companies, I hear, yeah, we're looking for the C-level role first and then have them build out their teams. But from what I heard is that you had an interim in the C-level that first built up the team, and then now you're starting to look for a permanent C-level for that role.
Well, that's an example, right? So, I mean, that could happen in that order, or it could be the inverse. It really just depends on the company where they are. But ultimately, the moral of the story is that this individual came in and fixed the machine, fixed the infrastructure, and put them in a position where then it made sense to go out and actually find a resident leader. Whereas before, whomever they would have brought in, if it was on a full-time basis, they would have been set up for failure. Like that's kind of the moral of the story, is that they were not mature enough as an organization to bring in a leader. They needed to bring in a consultant, somebody with outside and objective, opinion on what's going right and what's going wrong, versus kind of a company man or woman that's going to say, yeah, everything's great, it's awesome, and then they leave in 6 months because they're not set up for success.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've seen sorry, Maurice, but I've seen a number of growth companies where the founder is an engineer or the founder is a product person, where finding the right salesperson or finding the right CFO is very hard because it's way outside of their skill set. I've seen the inverse happen too, right? You have a great salesperson who founds the company and just knows every single customer, and then trying to find the right engineering people is just outside their expertise. How do you help your customers sort of bridge those gaps and see their blind spots that they might not be aware of?
Good question. A lot of that is, that's why it's also so paramount that we spend time with the executive leadership team, is so we really get to understand them, the culture, the company, and what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, you've got to create trust, and that takes a little while to establish. So I think that's the biggest component. Also, too, at a certain level, not to say that skill sets are at parity, but at a certain level, skill sets are at parity. And so what really kind of matters is like the soft skills and who's going to interact best with the kind of existing leadership team. And that's an area in which we excel as well, because it's not necessarily about, the skills per se, but who's going to be the most effective leader within this organization. And that's something that we try to kind of hone in on. That's part of our process during discovery and discussions. But it really starts with having an honest conversation with the company. And if they're not honest, open, and transparent with us, I mean, we're only going to be so effective at our jobs.
That's an interesting situation. I see that every now and then, where you sometimes you have to not only ask the tough question, but also give the tough answer, right? Give the tough statement like, no, this isn't working. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that a role that cannot be easy, right? And make an entrepreneur that are very confident in themselves because they brought the company there, right? They made it to 20 million, to 30 million. To tell them like, no, this is not how you proceed. You need to change your C-level staff for you to make the next steps.
I mean, that's part of what's one of our core values is transparency. And, you know, you kind of get what you get from me, honestly. And now granted, that takes a little while to create a relationship with somebody where you feel comfortable telling them that their baby's ugly. But I really don't want to work with companies where I can't have a candid and a frank discussion. And so part of what we do is we'll go out into the market and do some due diligence. And if we're unable to find this perfect person, we'll take that data back to our customers and let them know that, you know, salary's too low or expectations of experience are not in line with, you know, all these different factors. But we'll take it back to them and literally provide data that supports kind of maybe what's going on. But again, I've got a no a-hole policy within my company. I want to work with companies where I can create an actual relationship, you know, with these leaders. They feel comfortable sharing with me, but conversely, you know, I feel extremely comfortable sharing with them as well, what's going on. And, you know, if their expectations are out of whack.
So how do you stay current with all of that? Because I can imagine that if you're deep into projects and deep in with your customers and so on, how do you stay current in what the trends are in the broader business world? What kind of media do you consume? What information do you consume and so on?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, like I've got a lot of books. I'm an avid reader. So, you know, self-help books, industry books. You know, I also too subscribe to different forums. I use LinkedIn a good amount. LinkedIn's gotten a bit convoluted, to be honest with you. There's a tremendous amount of noise on LinkedIn. Honestly, I wish there was a different platform, and I'm kind of, you know, my efforts in 2023 are going to be to find another platform for me. I mean, it's really kind of, you know, you've got to spend time keeping a pulse on what's going on in your industry, what's going on in your world, and what's going on with your clients, and what are they seeing. And so I do try to have touch points with my clients, you know, at least once a quarter, even if we're not actively doing business with them, on what are they seeing, you know, so I can kind of share that information. And of course, too, that's a two-way street where I'll share what I'm seeing as well. But I mean, if you're not spending 20% of your time researching your industry, I think that's a missed opportunity.
Absolutely.
Let me ask the other side of that question, Maurice.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So you said, Beau, back at the beginning, you said you were in Toronto because somebody had told you to be in Toronto.
Yeah.
All right. And the idea of sort of running your own ship gives you the freedom to run it however you want. So how do you take care of the captain of the ship these days?
Oh, so couple of things. I've got a couple of non-negotiables. So, you know, this is going to be more around kind of just scheduled maintenance. You know, you talking about like how I take care of kind of like my mental health and just food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
your family, your whole things.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm a very regimented person. Like I've got to work out. I work out 6 days a week, you know, come hell or high water. I wake up at 5:50. I'm not going to say I wake up at 4 a.m. or anything ridiculous. I'm the same outfit every day. But I'm very regimented. So I get up and I work for about an hour before my family gets up. Now that's usually low value work where my brain's still waking up, but you know, I'm taking care of my emails, taking care of a lot of stuff. Family's up and I'm with them for at least an hour or so getting ready for school, but I'm very, very present. And that's been very helpful for me. Then I'll work through the day, but I also make time for breaks and for walks around the neighborhood as well, just to clear my mind, be it on the phone or just kind of listen to a podcast of sorts. Perhaps this one will be what I'll be tuning into next time. Yeah, and then I also too, you know, I shut down the day typically anywhere from 4:30, 4:45, and I'm with my family until they go to bed at 7:30. And if I need to plug back in, I will. What's been really important to me is making sure the lines are not blurred between, because I work from home. So like making sure the lines are not blurred between work life and family life. And, I'll not respond to, and this is something I've had to work on too, though. It's like when I first started, everything was freaking urgent, because your hair's on fire. It's a house of cards, ground's unstable. Like it's really tough. And, maybe, I guess I'm in a different situation now. But I've worked on myself, and I figured out how to turn my phone on, do not disturb or silent, and let emails rest and sit until tomorrow. And that's been the biggest thing that I've done. I think from a mental health perspective, that's helped, is just relax. You're not going to go out of business tomorrow if you don't respond to this email. And that's literally like what goes through your brain, and what you have to tell yourself, just to kind of chill, calm yourself down, and stay present with the family.
Yeah, I had an elderly mentor once from Munich, Germany, very successful, and he told me that whatever email comes Fridays past 3 p.m. is the beginning of your end. Kind of saying that if you do this working late into the night, or taking away your private time, the time that you're supposed to have to recharge yourself, your mind, and your family situation, that's the beginning of the end, because something will start to fail, and not in a good way, right? Not in a fail fast way, in a fail substantially way.
It's easy to allow yourself to push those boundaries. And you brought up a good point, and just kind of circling back to what you asked me, Russ, is that on Fridays as well, I not always, but I try to play golf, or pick my kids up from school at 3:30. But like, you're not going to catch me, even if it's like mission critical. You will not get on my calendar from 3:30 onward on Friday, period. Yeah. Like, I mean, granted, there's a couple of situations where, let me. I'm not that regimented, but that's a non-negotiable for me as well. Like Fridays 3:30, I'm done.
That's it.
Good stuff.
That's good stuff. Hey, tell me about your 16-year-old self. If you had to meet him now and would tell him about where you're at, what it is that you're doing, and everything that's going on in your life, what would be the tips and the tricks that you would tell this person, the 16-year-old Beau?
Couple things. So try harder. Like I was always at 16 and in high school, I didn't necessarily really have to try. I could still make good grades, and then kind of got into college where I still could make pretty decent grades without really having to try. And that's kind of something I regret, is that I wish I took school a little bit more serious. Also too, I would tell myself not to lose the spark. I feel like it's really easy. I was always an optimistic, kind of outgoing person, but I feel like it's pretty easy to kind of lose that spark as you get older, because you're just inundated with like negativity, with social media, news, and like stuff that goes on with your kids and all that stuff. There's just a lot of negativity. I feel like it's always impacting us, and it's easy to kind of lose that brightness and lose the spark. And so that's something I would tell my former self as well. Like, just don't get caught up in the minutia and the BS. Like, don't lose the spark. Always be focused on kind of maximizing life. Because to me, that's really important, is just like live the best life that I can. And then finally, take more risks. I've started a company, so I feel like I've taken some risks. But I feel like it's easy for us to get kind of caught up in this risk aversion world and realm, but also to be victim to what people say. And candidly, I wanted to start my company 4 years earlier than I started it, but I got caught up in all the BS. Oh, don't do that. Why would you start a company? It's stupid. You're doing well. Things are great. Now, screw that. Take more risks. Don't lose your spark. Keep that optimism. Start a company early.
Fantastic. That's great stuff. I have one more question for you. What's going on with your podcast? Tell me, what are some of the great stories that you had on there, great guests, and what to look out for, and where, obviously, to find your podcast?
Man, I appreciate that. So, quick selfish plug. So thefreeagent.com, that's the company website. Beau Billington, BeauBillington at LinkedIn. My podcast is Finding That Next Gear. And man, we're just getting started, to be honest with you. I've had to, we've gone through COVID, and maybe we're in a recession, maybe we're not. So I've had to kind of prioritize some things over the podcast. But I've got around 20 episodes now, and I've really, man, I love it. And the coolest part about it is, you know, it's similar to your conversations. You get to talk up to these high growth entrepreneurs, and it's like from like back of the napkin, you know, ideation and inception to like scaling and growth and then potential exit. And to me, that's what's really exciting. And more importantly, I feel, and again, similar to what you guys are doing, that I get to shine a spotlight on entrepreneurship and the highs and the lows, because we only hear about the highs. And I feel like the lows, it's part of the journey. It's part of the game, right? I mean, without those, you know, like the lows are what, you know, I've had more growth in the last 5.5 years. I mean, literally personal growth. And it's been some of the bleakest and darkest times as well, but also some of the most fun, optimistic, and bright times. And I feel like, you know, that struggle is part of the beauty that's entrepreneurship, and being able to shine a light on that is what excites me.
Okay. That's all I have. I think that's a fantastic ending.
It is great.
So have a pleasure of having you here. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, cool, gentlemen. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you thinking of me, Maurice, and having me on.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Beau. It's great. Absolutely great stuff.
Exciting, for sure.
Right. Thanks, everyone. This was another episode of These Crazy People in a Podcast. And yeah, see you back. Stay tuned to this channel, and hopefully with the next episode. Thank you, and bye-bye.